Have you ever wondered what hell feels like? Well, I'm about to take you there, to the vast walls of Eastern State Penitentiary. To walk us through Eastern State Penitentiary, we called upon the help of Linda Nealon, the Assistant Program Director.
I love history, so through my job I get to share this fascinating history of Eastern State with students such as yourself.
Over the 142 years of the prison's existence, Ms. Nealon has heard some fascinating stories that come out of Eastern State.
We have Al Capone's cell sort of restored. We went back through the newspapers and found details of what his cell looked like. So we have put in furniture and other furnishings from the day, from that time period. And we do know he came here on a concealed deadly weapons charge. He was arrested and first sent to Holmesburg Prison, which is the county jail at the time, and he requested to be sent here to Eastern State. So he came here, got a very large cell, was allowed to furnish the cell in any way he chose. We do know he donated baseball uniforms to the baseball team, and he definitely tried to make nice with the inmates. And he was here for 8 months before he was released. The warden was concerned that one of his enemies was going to come looking for him when he was released, because this was soon after the St. Valentine's Day massacre. So he actually snuck him out to Graterford prison, which is in Montgomery County, and released him from there rather than Eastern State. But we do have film footage of people gathering outside the front of the penitentiary hoping to catch a glimpse of Al Capone. But unfortunately they were disappointed.
But Al Capone was not the only celebrity inmate to do time at Eastern State Penitentiary.
As far as Willie Sutton, he was an infamous bank robber. His nicknames were Slick Willie or Willie the Actor, because he was just that smooth of a criminal. He did rob many banks, and he was sent to Eastern State Penitentiary for that charge. While he was here, he tried to escape many times, and eventually did get out as part of the 1945 tunnel escape. 12 men went under the wall, and he was caught within about 8 minutes and returned to Eastern State.
We're here at the site where the tunnel was dug for a very famous Great Escape, and Miss Nealon will inform us how everything went down.
So we're in the cell of Clarence Kleindienst, and he was actually a stonemason plasterer. So he was working around the penitentiary. There is a location on site where you can see his initials. We believe he carved them in that location. But one of his jobs was replastering this cell. Now, while he was replastering, he was allowed to keep his tools with him at night. And he was a trustee, meaning he never broke the rules. All of the guards liked him. He was a good prisoner. So he talked to the guards at one point, and he said, you know, as I'm going to be replastering, I'm going to kick up a lot of dust, and I'm a bit concerned about you breathing all of that in. So he asked to put a wet sheet over his doorway. So imagine this door covered with a wet sheet. Now, while he was working in here, the guards thought he was just taking off the old plaster, when in actuality he was pulling out stones from here, as well as taking off the old plaster, but the guards could not see. He managed to create a cover for this. It was, he called it either it was a wastebasket or a laundry basket type thing, attached to a piece of wall that he created. He would fit it over the hole, take Vaseline, paint chips, dirt, rub it all together, and then put it into the edges around that cover. And so the guards would come in, inspect the cell, because they would do that at different times. They actually got suspicious that he was doing something. They never saw it. He ended up getting a cellmate, and so he and his cellmate worked together. They made a plaster face, and they put it into one of the beds and made it look like there was someone in the bed while that person was down digging the hole. If a guard came by, the other person would talk as if they're talking to this other inmate, so the guard didn't even bother looking closely. So it took them about a year, but they dug 97 feet. They went about 10 or 15 feet down, straight out, underneath the wall, and then back up through the terrace out front. 12 men escaped. So Clarence Kleindienst, his cellmate William Russell, as well as one very famous inmate, Willie Sutton, who was an infamous bank robber. So they all went out through this tunnel. Willie Sutton was captured just a couple blocks away in just a few minutes. Clarence Kleindienst was caught a couple hours later in northeastern Philadelphia. And every single person actually was brought back. We have seen the solitary confinement area together. Actually, Willie Sutton and some of the other men were put into one of these solitary confinement cells, and then were later transported to another prison. This was Holmesburg Prison. It was considered escape-proof. Willie Sutton escaped from that prison again with one of the other men from the tunnel escape, and that other man was never seen again after that. So this escape ended up leading to the ultimate final escape for one of the inmates.
Although Willie Sutton's tunnel escape was the most famous, it was only one of many escape attempts. Well, we're here at the Cell Block 3 Corner Guard Tower, and Ms. Nealon's going to tell us when and why this was built.
Well, when Eastern State Penitentiary first opened, there weren't guard towers in the corners. It was just decoration to make it look like a castle. But in 1923, there was an escape. 6 men formed a ladder made out of wood. It was in 6 different pieces. They each had a 5-foot section. They snapped them together, put it against the wall, climbed over, used a rope to get to the other side, and disappeared. 5 of them were recaptured, but 1 has never been seen again. So in response to that, the warden in charge, Colonel Groom, decided things were going to change. He put corner guard towers in so that guards could be up there, keeping an eye on everything down here. And for the first time, he armed guards. The guards that were up in the towers did have Tommy guns. Thompson submachine guns. They were basically the weapon of choice of the gangsters of that era.
This is the Central Guard Tower. It was used so that the guards could easily maintain order over the inmates and watch easily over the cell blocks. It's located in the center of the prison so that they can maintain a very great view over all the cell blocks in the entire prison. Perhaps so many inmates tried to escape Eastern State Penitentiary because it was known to be a particularly brutal environment.
Well, actually, Eastern State Penitentiary was investigated for the punishment cells here. The state came in, looked at the way that inmates were being punished, and declared that this was cruel and unusual punishment. These punishment cells were closed down, and that is when Eastern State Penitentiary built what we call death row. It was cell block 15.
Another form of punishment used by Eastern State Penitentiary was the solitary confinement cell.
Generally, their rations would be cut. There have been stories of some times when inmates would have 3 or 4 days of bread and water, and then a day of one real meal, and then more days of bread and water. They also would have a bucket rather than a toilet. It would be dark unless the guards decided to turn the light on. And generally they could be given a mattress while they're in solitary, but it would be taken away during the day so that it was as uncomfortable as possible.
All of these punishments were the penitentiary's own brand of prisoner reform, which was considered very radical at the time.
Throughout the years, people at Eastern State Penitentiary were trying to figure out a way to cure crime, if you will. So they were trying different things. Now, by the time you get to this point, history tells us that in the 20s and 30s, Eastern State Penitentiary had such a high population that they also had very high violence rates. You had escapes, you had riots, and the wardens were generally just trying to keep control of this place. So while it does sound awful and cruel, and I don't think that they should have used it, at the same time you look at the desperation of the people trying to maintain the safety and control of the prison. Perhaps they were lacking the resources they needed. They never should have turned to something like this, but you can kind of understand the frustration that probably came out of it.
Really, I feel that this was an excellent plan, only because I feel that if you want to, be in, a papoose, if you will, then you need, some type of, I don't know what order, and you need to be, broken and restored. That's just my personal theory. I mean, I pretty much am amazed what they did here, and I feel like they weren't wrong. For some people like Willie Sutton or Al Capone, I feel like they needed to, be broken down mentally so that they can, have proper reform. Although Eastern State had its share of torture and brutal punishments, the people there also knew how to have a lot of fun. We're here at the baseball field. This was used, for games, for sports, for inmates and such. This is what the benches used to look like. And what we're sitting on now is a restored version. This is where the spectators would sit. And Miss Nealon will fill us in on all the information we need to know.
All right. Through the 20th century, recreation was very important for the inmate population as well as for the administration to keep people busy when they didn't have enough work for them. So in the 1950s, Eastern State tore down the buildings that used to stand on this field to create a baseball field. They put in a backstop, and they also put uprights on top of the backstop for field goals when they played football here. This was a very popular, baseball was a very popular sport. There was a paper that the inmates printed called The Umpire, where they printed all of the sports scores as well as other information and news items that inmates might be interested in. And when you look out here at the baseball field, you have to remember it wasn't just here that the spectators sat. They actually lined the tops of the shops or former exercise yards. Everyone was out here to see the games.
Nowadays, there is something else that is drawing people to Eastern State. As you can see, hell is loose in Eastern State Penitentiary. Hope you've all had a good time in hell. I'll see you soon.